This is the first OpenChain policy workgroup meeting. Our focus will be on public policy, and we'll basically be talking about what is useful to discuss in this field. Now we're going to give it a couple of minutes for people to dial in. We know that some participants from around the world may be starting early or a little late. While we're waiting for people to dial in, I will show our antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every Linux Foundation meeting. The purpose of this policy is to make sure that everyone is comfortable with the discussion. The full policy can be found on the OpenChain website. The Linux Foundation website. And if you have any questions about the policy, you can ask our counsel, Andy Updegrove, if you're from a Linux Foundation member company. Now we're going to swing to the main body of this conversation. Like I said, this is the first public policy workgroup meeting. And because of that, we're going to have a very simple agenda. We're going to do some brief introductions. We're going to have a little bit of a segment with an overview of policy concerns in Europe and Asia, and then an open discussion on next steps. Because this is our first meeting and it's about the general tone, it might be relatively short. Let's see. So to get things started, let's do introductions. I'm Shane Coughlin, the General Manager of the OpenChain project. It's my job to help facilitate discussions around the OpenChain community. For those of you who might be new, the OpenChain project is focused on trust in the supply chain, and our optic is types of compliance around open source software. Now I'm going to call out your names for the intro section. If you don't feel comfortable with introducing yourself, that's okay. If you do feel comfortable with introducing yourself, my request is just tell us your name and the organization you're from. If you're not from any organization, you can just say you're independent. Let's start off with Ben Lidda.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, this is Benilda, working in Robert Bosch as OSS compliance team.
It's great to have you here. Next
Thank
up,
you.
you're welcome. Next up, Yari.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, whichever time zones you are. I'm Jari, and currently I work as a contractor for KPMG International, and the role is OSPO lead. And I've been with OpenChain for quite some time already.
Yes, indeed, a very familiar face. Thank you, Yari. Next up, Jimmy.
Hi, so my name is Jimmy Ahlberg. I work for Ericsson in our OSPO. Been involved with OpenChain for a little while now, less than Yari for certain. And as of last week, I'm also sharing the governing board of OpenChain. So nice to meet everyone here.
Indeed, and you'll be hearing more from Jimmy, no doubt, in the months and years to come. Thank you, Jimmy. Katharina.
Hello, this is Katharina from PwC Germany.
Good to have you here, of course, as always. Lennart.
Hello, my name is Lennart. I'm from BMW. I'm the OSPO of BMW.
Good to have you here. Marcel.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, that's the wrong camera, I see. So, yeah, my name is Marcel. I'm from PwC Germany, and I'm head of our open source software services, and I'm involved with OpenChain for quite some years already.
Good to have you here, as always. Martin.
Hello, I'm Martin Yagi. I'm from First Light Fusion, a small Oxford University spin-out company.
Good to have you here, Martin. And for those of you who don't know, Martin has been very involved in our education material. Indo-san. Indo-san is currently muted. In case there's an audio problem, Indo-san is from Toyota, previously a board member of OpenChain and one of the key people involved in our OpenChain Japan and automotive work groups. Tommy.
Hi everybody, I'm Tommy from Fastcom. I just want to join this group and get familiar with what OpenChain doing.
Okay, it's good to have you here, Tommy.
Thank you.
Shan-san, I
Hello,
can yes. Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Masato Endo from Toyota Motor Corporation. I'm engaged in software development as a manager, and I also focused on the OpenChain project to make the governance structure inside Toyota. And I will also promoting Japan work group and automotive work group also. Thank you.
Good to have you here, Endo-san. Okay, the next phase after introductions is an overview of open source policy concerns in Europe and Asia. I won't go into too much depth, but I'll give you a taste of the type of concerns we see. Now, this is only a beginning. It's only the start of the discussion. This is not intended to be the canonical version of what's important. In Europe, the majority of companies are small and medium enterprises. Around 80% of the European economy, the EU economy, is powered by small to medium enterprises. We know that an awful lot of these companies, just like large companies, depend on open source software. There are open source discussions on strategy all across the continent. For example, some markets like Sweden or Germany are relatively advanced in discussions around open source policy, process management. Germany may be the most advanced market in the European Union. However, it was noticeable while recently doing multiple events in Germany that the connection between the business side of open source and the policy side of open source was not as deep as it could be. For example, one of the largest events in Germany for very useful discussions around open source strategy, the Bitkom event, had no policymakers from the German government or the European Union. This isn't a critical issue, but it's an example that perhaps we can do better to build bridges. Meanwhile, in Asia, we have seen some pretty good interaction between business and government on public policy. Endo-san, for example, was involved in discussions with the Ministry of Trade, METI, in Japan, and METI, by way of example, even includes the OpenChain ISO standard for open source license compliance in their open source governance documentation. We've seen similar work in Korea with ETRI, which is another governmental organization, and in China, CAICT, which is under Ministry of Trade in China, has also been pretty involved in things like OpenChain. This seems to indicate that in some parts of Asia, like China, Japan, Korea, the traditional CJK bloc, the interaction between business and government on policy is relatively good. However, in other parts of Asia, that interaction is not as good. In areas like, let's say, Vietnam and Cambodia, very important to the supply chain, the amount of advanced government policy based on advanced market dynamics seems to be limited. This suggests that the policy concerns in Asia and Europe come down to the same thing: building bridges between what's happening in business and what's happening in government policy, public policy discussions. Building bridges there is important. So my first proposal to this work group is that maybe we need to think about how we build good bridges so government policymakers are always aware of the current state of the art in business, and they can make appropriate policy around open source. I wanted to pause there and see if anyone had any comments about this. Remember, this is an informal discussion. We're sharing ideas. We're not making important decisions. Jimmy, over to you.
Yes, so yes, I share your observations. I'm somewhat less optimistic about the state of Sweden than you are, but perhaps that's my bias from it being my native market. I will say that one sort of thing in sort of this public policy arena is really what we see is the need for good quality higher education available to university students on open source, and then not only this is how you develop open source, this is the legal of open source, but also sort of this is the economics behind open source and open innovation. I think we see a lack of that, at least in Sweden, and I'm sure sort of the rest of Europe as well. So that's something, at least from our side at Ericsson, that we would like to try to address, to either sort of commission universities to have these courses, engage with the Ministry of Education to ensure that sort of they give the assignment to the universities to have these kind of courses, or collaborate with universities on developing them. I think there's certainly a market need to have this. So it would be good to just hear the experiences of others on this call. If sort of in your native markets, are there courses on open source available in universities, or is this something that seems to be universally lacking?
Yari, over to you.
Just one kind of addition, like Jimmy, you mentioned universities, but I think, it should be cross, the whole education curriculum, what one can have, because not everybody who is involved in coding goes to the university. So I believe that it should be cross the educational steps, more or less, like, because if you think that open source is 70 to 95% of all software today, it touches everybody. So I would broaden the view outside of just the universities, where we should have. And in US, there was some university who has some open source courses, but that's more or less the only one I know, or I at least I've heard of.
I teach one course element at the University of Chalmers, which is essentially a 2-hour lecture on open source, and then students are given a business case assignment they need to solve in relation to open source. But that's sort of, for Sweden, that's about it, what I'm aware of, except that I think there's one course that has sort of as a course element that the students need to do an assignment in GitHub, but I don't think really that's not what we're looking for, even though it's good. But I think your point is excellent on the need to have it in sort of the entire educational chain.
Thank you, Jimmy and Yari. I noticed Belinda has her hand up. Over to you, Belinda. You've got to unmute yourself, but you can talk at any time if you unmute. Okay, we currently can't hear you. You're muted. I'm just going to throw the floor open to Marcel while we wait for you.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on this point that actually I think it's important to start very early in terms of open source usage. So I mean, it would be helpful and great if schools who start in whatever 4th, 5th, 6th grade with some computer courses and so on, if they already would be using open source and not only the proprietary operating systems and proprietary software, because that's happening here mostly at schools, as far as I know, that they all use the standard proprietary tools. And I mean, actually, that would be a great starting point for kids to involve with open source from this point. In terms of universities, here in Germany, to be honest, I don't have a full overview, but as far as I know, open source is also lacking in terms of courses and so on. There are 1, 2, 3 universities who focus a little bit on this, but and who do have particular open source elements and courses and so on. But I think it's rather rare. And in terms of policies, I think, of course, I mean, here in Europe, the different countries might come up with different ideas and different things, but I think the EU is very important in terms of policies here in Europe, to form policies which all countries then have to adhere to. So that's interesting to watch and to influence what's going on in terms of European policies, I think.
A really good point. Now, it sounds like we have an emerging consensus that this public policy discussion might usefully start in education, and that in the educational side, we have work to do. Before we move on, I just want to give another chance for Benilda to unmute, and if she has a comment to join in. If not, I'd like to make a proposal. If it's something that we identify as being education biased, perhaps on the next call, we should seek to invite some academics to talk about how we could contribute to support their work. For example, in Germany, Dirk Reel has many years of experience in supporting open source. Oh, Marcel, your hand is up. Over to you.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. You can finish first.
Oh, no, that was really it. Just let's invite.
Okay. Yeah, I thought, I mean, it would be interesting when we have people from different countries here in this call, to perhaps start putting together everything that we know about policy work in different countries. So if we have a shared Excel spreadsheet, or if we do it on Git or whatsoever, that everyone starts to collect what is actually going on. Because here in Germany, there's also the whole topic of Zendis, the central OSPO infrastructure, which is about to be built, and open code and so on. And if we all collect what's already going on and whatever everyone knows, it would be interesting to then see what is the current state actually.
That's a great point. So it sounds like then the two outcomes that we have so far is a shared spreadsheet to collect state of the market and to invite at least one academic to the next call to talk about their perspective. Is there anything else you'd like to see happen on our next call or by our next call? And just for reference, I think we should probably have the next call around mid to late January, as everyone has caught up with their email and has some time to dedicate. Marco, over to you.
Thank you. And well, I'm new in this group. I subscribed to the mailing list recently, and I lost the beginning of the call. So sorry, because I didn't know about it. I discovered it a few minutes ago. However, I have one point which could be added maybe, because recently I've been invited to 2 meetings. They were closed, but because it's something that is just beginning to be discussed, and there is some reservation still to discuss it openly, but both were about open source and geopolitics, because in a way there are 2 elements which I think are happening and are important in terms of public policy and open source. The first is that more and more states, governments are engaging with open source in a more strategic way for various reasons, no? This is the first. And the second, of course, it's that there is an increasing tensions about technology and politics, no? And geopolitics. So both are bringing new elements and are bringing the open source ecosystem to become more aware about the possibility to be involved, in tensions and in more strategic actions which can come from governments, states, or groups of states, no? I think this is one point which maybe could be interesting for this group to discuss about.
That sounds like a really good point, a very good point indeed. And hopefully we can directly help people in this discussion. One thing that comes to mind is that with the geopolitics right now, access to software and other technology is very important and potentially going to have some challenges across legal jurisdictions. So helping people understand the way those challenges apply or do not apply to open source may be a useful contribution. Okay, it sounds like we have an agenda of 3 things for the next meeting. Have an academic come, build a map of the market as much as possible before, and then talk about, as Marco said, how we can address the way that this topic is becoming more strategic for government decision makers as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the agenda for the next meeting? If not, we'll wrap it up here. I'll create that spreadsheet and we'll begin the process of populating our shared knowledge. I'll just pause here to see if there's any other business. And remember, feel free to jump in. This is your community. We talk about what you want to talk about. Okay. We've already had a remarkably productive first meeting in just 24 minutes. Because the main productive outcome, apart from inviting people to the next meeting, the main productive outcome is to work on consolidating our knowledge into a spreadsheet. We will end this meeting here. I will create that document this week, and let's begin populating it with what we know about the market situation. I think that will be the first time we've seen that happen in open source and public policy. Jimmy just noted it was a great meeting and good outcomes. I cannot agree more. Thank you, everyone, and please have a wonderful day. Take care, and let's talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.